So, welcome. I'm Dennis Strakota. I'm a board member with Together for Timnath, and thank you for all of you coming tonight to this presentation on dark skies. And I'll just mention that this presentation will be recorded and will be available on the website of Together for Timnath. So if you were not able to attend, you'll be able to view it online. And so I'd like to just start out right away and introduce our presenter, who's John Garvey, and he's chairman of Dark Sky Colorado. It's a 501(c) dedicated to protecting the night sky, heritage, health, and well-being of Colorado's people. John likes to say that some of his fine experiences when he was a kid included summer vacations in Colorado and looking at the Milky Way from his backyard in Wichita, Kansas. And since that time, after realizing that being a ninja was not a viable career, he became a writer and marketer currently at what is the name?
Garvington Creative.
Garvington Creative. Okay, so how did you come up with that?
It's common, so it's kind of a play on my last name, of course.
Right.
Also, no URL with my name was available. And I just like
Okay.
spun it off and didn't.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and he's, I know very active in the community. We both live in Trailside. I know he has a great deal of interest in what's going on in that neighborhood. He also started Timnath Pub Runners, which meets each Thursday at Timnath Beer Works. He's been a Northern Colorado resident since 2013 and loves hiking, running, music, books, his blended family, and the Wolverine Farm Public House. So with that, John, I'll leave you to start your presentation.
Thanks, Dennis. I'll try not. Okay, let's see. I think that'll work. I'm here to talk about, light pollution affects people in a lot of ways that even people that are bothered by it aren't necessarily aware of all the different effects that it has on our public health, natural environment, quality of life. And I think I'll just start by getting into basically our light pollution narrative is bogus. The idea that it's just something we have to be resigned to and it goes hand in hand with growth or development, or that there are like stringent trade-offs involved in dark sky lighting practices, that is all bogus. You can have healthy growth and also have a healthy nighttime environment and conserve the dark sky. And I'll talk a little bit about how. But first, as Dennis alluded to, my first memory of the Milky Way, I was about 6 years old, and I was standing in my backyard in Wichita, Kansas. And it wasn't on the outskirts of town either. It was in like suburban Wichita, reasonably close to some of the like commercial hubs of the town. And Wichita at the time was 30 times the size that Timnath is today. I could see the Milky Way from my own backyard. And I forgot about this for years. I took it for granted as a kid. I remember I looked up at my mom. My mom pointed out that band of like light and stars scattered across the sky was called the Milky Way, and I was young enough to innocently ask, is it made out of milk? And now if you stand in that exact same spot today, what you see is like a kind of anemic grayish blue veil with a few stars poking out, like Orion's belt and a handful of other stars. It's pretty sad to think that children growing up today have such a different experience of childhood. And I think back on that and I think like, damn, I'm gonna stand up. I really feel like I took that for granted, and I kind of like kick myself for taking it for granted, but I've thought about that too, and you're supposed to be able to take things for granted as a child. And like a good childhood is a childhood where you do at least have the luxury of taking like your safety for granted and a lot of the nice things that you get to experience, relatively worry-free life. And so, yeah, I forgot for years and years that that was a thing, that I could look up from my backyard in Wichita and see the Milky Way. And when I remembered it, I thought I might have been imagining it a little bit. I was pretty sure that I remembered it, but I called my mom and I asked her, you know, we could see the Milky Way from the backyard when I was little, right? Like we used to look up at the Milky Way. Sam would come over with this telescope and we'd look at the Milky Way, and she said, oh yeah. And, you know, light pollution, we'll get into, I don't want to just talk about like how far we've degraded the night sky, because this is actually, given the size of the problem, it's an easy one to solve. So as I was saying, light pollution is not a necessary consequence of growth. It is just because of bad lighting design. And one of the things that has caused light pollution to accelerate so catastrophically in the last 15 years is called the Jevons paradox, which is the idea that increased efficiency in the use of a resource often leads to increased consumption of that resource. So LED lights became commercially available and affordable about a decade and a half ago, you know, like was when their adoption really scaled and when they became affordable at the household level. And like an efficiency technology, all things equal, it's a good thing. But I think one thing we really failed to anticipate is, you know, like now it's affordable for the first time ever for a small business or an individual homeowner or a property manager to install lights on the side of their building and keep them on all night. And not only that, but they last longer, and they, because they don't get as hot, you know, LEDs have a much longer life cycle than other forms of lighting. Again, that's a good thing in itself, but it's led to this rampant overuse of lighting in commercial and industrial and residential contexts. So, what is light pollution? It's the excessive or inappropriate use of outdoor light at night. Outdoor light at night, where it's appropriate, can be functional and valuable and even attractive. But we as a society kind of really almost neurotically overestimate how much lighting is necessary for security, and also just like sometimes a lighting plan is a complete afterthought. One type of light pollution that I'm going to focus on a little bit, especially with regard to public safety, is glare. And glare is direct lighting. It's usually direct lighting from an unshielded light source. It can also be reflected, but it's basically just lighting that is intense enough to cause visual impairment. And, you know, people speak of discomfort glare and disability glare, which is discomfort glare is glare that's bright enough to be uncomfortable, and disability glare is like becoming a real problem on our roads. And that's, I think you've probably all had at least one experience where you're driving and you're trying to take a left turn or something, and someone's oncoming headlights are so bright that you're literally completely blind for like somewhere between a fraction of a second and a couple seconds. It sucks, I think. But it isn't just a phenomenon that you have with cars. This is just like a quick visual of how lighting can be really counterproductive from a public safety standpoint. Because we talk about, I think we think about lighting in absolute terms, like how much lighting is there on a property, and more lighting is better, and more lighting makes the property more secure, but what really matters from a public safety standpoint a lot of the time is contrast. So if you have, you know, in most neighborhoods or in a lot of neighborhoods and in a lot of campuses, the darkest places are places that are very close to a bright light source, and that's because they cast these deep shadows. And glare also actually facilitates property crime, and in some cases it can help criminals pick their victims, and you can kind of see why. Oh, the picture on the right too, that's me in a parking lot at a music festival, and every year I go to this wonderful festival. This is the only gripe I have about it, is that like you drive out of the parking lot going 5 miles an hour and it's just like a white knuckle drive. Like, you know, there's cyclists and pedestrians all over the parking lot. You know that a lot of them are at least somewhat intoxicated, and you can't see where you're going because they have these giant lights. So just to the point that lighting is very often a public safety hazard. So natural cycles of light and darkness should be considered one key dimension of, and we don't think about this as often as we think about like emissions and, you know, like water pollution and air pollution and different forms of pollution involving like what we conventionally speak of as pollution. But light pollution has really devastating consequences to the natural environment. The most talked about of these are its impacts on migratory birds and sea turtle hatchlings. It kills millions of migratory birds every year. Most visibly, this happens because of building collisions, but it also happens because they just are more exposed to predators. They're more likely to veer off course significantly, and they're flying on a, you know, very limited energy supply. Migratory birds sometimes lose 50% of their body mass over the course of their migration. So if you steer them off course a couple dozen miles, then that doesn't bode well for them. And but light pollution also like pretty much almost all animal behavior is influenced by natural cycles of light and darkness. So like pollination, mating, hunting, foraging, as well as for like trees and fauna, that also influences their growth. So when you mess with the knock-on effects that it has beyond the really visible things like bird deaths are really substantial, and we're only coming to understand some of them. Oh yeah, and this is like the aftermath of one particularly bad incident involving a public event venue in Chicago in October of 2023 during the seasonal fall bird migration, where nearly 1,000 birds died colliding with a single building. Obviously, we don't have any kind of equivalent to that in Timnath, but it just bears noting that this is something that kills millions of birds every year. So what you just saw is like not even something that would barely even register on a pie chart. In 2016, and a couple of times since, the American Medical Association issued guidance for outdoor lighting practices. And the reason for that is basically, if you are exposed to a lot of harsh artificial light at night, especially like blue light, then that causes melatonin suppression. And so it messes with your sleep quality. Even if you're fortunate enough that it doesn't cause you to have insomnia or be able to fall asleep through the night, it messes with your sleep architecture, which is basically like the different phases of sleep that you go through. So you don't get as much deep sleep and you don't get as much REM sleep, and you will wake up feeling a bit less rested, maybe substantially less rested. And when you mess with people's circadian health, their sleep health, you also mess with every other dimension of their health. So light pollution is correlated to an increased risk of several kinds of cancer, low birth weight, diabetes, obesity, insomnia, depression, and a couple of other things. So it's really important from a public health perspective, particularly, and just took a couple of pictures from outside of a hotel. I mean, this is really bizarre to me that it would ever occur to somebody to shine, to have a lighting plan at a hotel that involves shining lights directly into people's windows. But it's weird, like you see this a lot in the hospitality industry, and I don't really understand it. You also, of course, see some examples of really tasteful, inviting, gentle, artificial outdoor lighting. But one thing that's particularly important from the public health perspective is light spectrum. And that is measured, the key metric is Kelvin, and that's basically what we use to measure warmth, like the warmth of a light fixture. So like candlelight, it's on a scale from 0 to 10,000 Kelvin. Candlelight, like amber light, is really low on the scale, like 2,000 Kelvin. You see that nice warm light. Or like campfire, sunset, Edison lights, most of the time are really warm. So 3,000 Kelvin is about the cutoff of, there really isn't very many reasons. I don't think there are very many reasons to have indoor or outdoor light fixtures that exceed 3,000 Kelvin. That's partly a matter of personal taste, but the American Medical Association and a number of other organizations have recommended that street lighting not exceed 3,000 Kelvin, and that outdoor lighting, they recommend that it shouldn't exceed 3,000 Kelvin, or ideally 2,700 Kelvin. And again, so the reason for that is that the further up on that scale you get, two things. One, it has a stronger impact on your sleep, and it has a stronger impact on public health. And also it just scatters more. It's like short wavelength light, so it just scatters further. So 2 bulbs of equal wattage, one that's like 3000 Kelvin and one that's 6000 Kelvin. The 6000 Kelvin bulb will be visible from further away than the 3000 Kelvin bulb, and it will have a stronger effect on, you know, the night sky, the nighttime environment. So I would say, and this is always displayed on packaging. So before you buy a light bulb, these are usually marketed as like, you know, off-white or soft white or warm bulbs. Those are the ones that you'll want on your porch, if not in your home. So don't forget Kelvin. Yeah, this is really key. And when I was advocating for an update to our lighting ordinance, this was like the hill that I was ready to die on, because I have mild insomnia. I'm moderately light sensitive, so I think what most people probably experience, like a neurotypical person, I probably experience light at about like 1.5 or twice the intensity as you do. So I'm not one of those unfortunate people that is so sensitive to it that it will give me a migraine or something, but there are a lot of those people out there, so we should, oh, you know what, I'm gonna adjust the settings. Speaking of which, my computer went on sleep mode, so my computer actually shifted to a red light setting.
Is this bad for your health?
Well, if I'm on my computer in the evening, I want it to not be emitting a lot of that blue light, because, yeah, that's funny. Like I've been talking about, there you go. I was like, why is the screen orange? Well, now you know. It switches to night mode automatically at dusk. So good lighting design is a triple bottom line win. It is good for people, it's good for the planet, and it's good for the economy. And I've touched a little bit on people and public health, but I want to mention there's a certification called, let's see, Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design. And what's their overall thinking, so this was this was rolled out, I think, by the National Institute of Crime Prevention, which is founded by a guy who has 30 years experience in law enforcement. So it's not just a bunch of academics. But their thinking basically is that, yes, design lighting, you know, how do you design lighting to reduce opportunities for crime? And their emphasis isn't actually on crime deterrence, it's on social interaction, because a socially connected community is going to be a safer community. So you can and usually should have some outdoor lighting in a public area, of course, but thinking of crime deterrence first and foremost is kind of putting the cart before the horse. If you have a safely lit but walkable and inviting area, you're going to have a more connected community. You're going to be able to directly deter crime, especially when you're using practices like motion sensor lights and stuff. But you'll also have a welcoming space where people will get to know one another and recreate outdoors. And Dark Sky International has a partnership with the National Institute of Crime Prevention. If I can kill one misconception in my life, I would like it to be the misconception that this is some like trade-off that we have to navigate between night sky conservation and public safety. It is not, and the data doesn't support that idea. I could do an entire talk just about that, but I already touched on that. A good lighting plan and good lighting practices also are good for businesses and municipalities and individual homeowners. And some of the reasons are obvious, like if you're using less energy, you're saving money, but also I'm going to pick on one particular thing that you see a lot is these kinds of lights. They're called wall packs. They're these unshielded lights that you see on the side of buildings all the time. So first of all, this is a really good example. If you had nothing to do for a day, you could probably drive around and find a couple hundred examples of this in northern Colorado. But this building there's not a door on this side of the building, there's no windows, there's no points of access. So there's not even a sidewalk or a walkway that eliminates this. There's just like a 30-foot strip of grass and then a street and then neighboring businesses. So this light fixture doesn't need to be there and it's not serving any purpose whatsoever. But even if it were serving a theoretical purpose, these things should never have been commercialized, even from a purely business perspective. I'm not going to pretend that the reason I really care is because they waste money, but like it's not directional lighting. They just mount them to the side of buildings and they shine everywhere. So if you are a property manager or building owner, like at least 50 cents on the dollar that you're spending illuminating your property with these is being completely wasted. It's going into the sky, it's going into people's eyes as they're driving by, it's going onto neighboring properties, it's shining into people's bedroom windows, and it's not making your property more secure, it's just like barfing light out there everywhere. So if you have good directional lighting, a lot of shielded light fixtures have refractive inner surfaces. So with a relatively small bulb, you can illuminate the ground very effectively. So if you do have an area of your property that you want to keep lit up at night, you can achieve that with a smaller, less expensive fixture it'll save you on operating costs, it'll save you on upfront costs, and it will, if anything, secure your property a little bit more effectively because, to the point about glare, it's really uncomfortable when somebody is standing or walking between you and one of these bright light fixtures. You can't see their face, you can't see necessarily whether they have their hands in their pockets. It makes it difficult to discern their gestures. I worry very little about my personal safety, but I don't like being in that situation. But I want to talk about, how are we doing on time? We're good. Okay.
Keep going.
I want to wax philosophical for a minute too, because light pollution isn't good. And I want to also note one thing, Tucson, Arizona adopted dark sky ordinances and did a citywide lighting retrofit, and they saved, I think, it's $2.16 million a year on energy costs annually because they did this retrofit. So pretty quick payback and very, very valuable. Now, why the night sky matters to experience of childhood, I touched on that a little bit, to our mental health. There's some pretty good studies on that. But why do they matter to us culturally and spiritually? This is really, of the many reasons this matters, this is the most challenging to do justice, I think, when I speak about it. And in a way, this is like, nothing matters more than this, and I'm not talking about cosmic insignificance therapy, I'm talking about just our spiritual health in general and our culture. But cosmic insignificance therapy is this idea that I came across in a book called 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Berkman. It's a wonderful book, but basically, when you're looking up at the pristine night sky, it's impossible to catastrophize over an unopened invoice or a meeting with your boss or something you saw on social media or even an election. And you're looking at some of the stars you see when you look up at the sky are 10 times the size of the sun, and they're 3,000 light years away. And when you are, whether you realize that or not, but particularly when you do realize that, it's really laughable to get hung up over some of the things that we get hung up over. And even the things that do really weigh on you, because being a human, I'm not saying being a human being isn't hard, and like we all do have legitimate and heavy stuff that happens in our life, but that even provides a sort of solace for that. It's when you're looking up at the night sky, you're also struck with the realization that that thing is definitely not going to fall on me. And we do walk around like subconsciously, semi-consciously thinking that the sky is going to fall on us. And there's nothing like just looking at it to take a bite out of that. And yeah, you think, just thinking about the incredible vastness of the universe, like to the example I gave of the stars that are 10 times the size of the sun, it's, geez, the word's like right at the tip of my tongue. It's inconceivable. The universe is inconceivably vast, and so the paradox of cosmic insignificance therapy is that looking up at the night sky makes you feel very small, but whereas other people will sometimes make you feel small or try to make you feel small, and whereas the weight of the world's problems and the 24/7 news cycle will make you feel small in a helpless way, looking up at the cosmos makes you feel small in a liberating way. You realize that the last argument you had is utterly inconsequential in the grand scheme of things, laughably, absurdly inconsequential, and even legitimate hardships feel less weighty. And that's a great feeling, and that is why dark skies matter. I talked about light spectrum, I talked about Kelvin. Shielding is also really important. I have handouts today, the 5 principles of responsible outdoor lighting, which were developed by Dark Sky. And I won't go through all of them, but I want to get back to the point, like this is really important. Light pollution is growing 7 to 10% per year. So in communities across the US, if you look up at the night sky, there are 7 to 10% fewer stars visible. You're looking at 7 to 10% fewer stars than you would have been able to see from that exact spot the year before. It obviously depends on the exact community that you live in, but there's pretty robust data backing that. And, you know, I really kind of only scratched the surface of the environmental and public health consequences of that. And yet, for a problem of that scale, it is, compared to all of the other world problems, and compared to problems that and challenges that we face in this country, like housing affordability and, you know, like the effects of climate change and quite a number of other things, light pollution really is the easiest of them. It's pretty easy to solve. It's much more reversible than some of the other things that we're grappling with. And so that's the big part of the reason that I'm involved here, because I want to win and not just like rant about the state of the world on Facebook. Here's one example of a community that adopted dark sky lighting ordinances. A lot of the time, you can really mitigate light pollution without even doing a retrofit sometimes by just like tilting lights down so they're horizontal instead of at like a 40-degree angle. A lot of properties around here have these LED lights that are like a 40, and they're more than bright enough to sufficiently light up the entire property, you know, but they're tilted up and they shine everywhere. You know, we're not dark ground Colorado, we're dark sky Colorado. And here's another example of a hotel. It bears mentioning that among other problems with these like bright blue spectrum lights is they're just really unflattering. And that's, I mean, obviously that's pretty far down the list on the reason why they're a problem and why bad lighting design is a problem, but it is super unflattering. Like, just look at yourself in the mirror if you have like a 5,000 or 6,000 Kelvin light bulb, you just look like you've been on a bender or something. So, I've been introduced to the term sky glow. It's almost self-explanatory. It's just what is caused by all the uplight. You know, when you look up, especially on an overcast night, you can see this. You can see, it's called sky glow. You can see it from the sky. And in my neighborhood in Trailside, if you walk around on the trail at night, especially on an overcast night, you can see the sky glow from neighboring communities. And, you know, we don't need that to be a real town. We don't need to put the brakes on development. We don't need to make any like real compromises or sacrifices. We can just be a town with no sky glow and people will still think of us as a real town. So I think that's a really worthy aspiration 10 years from now, to be a town with no sky glow. The first generation of Americans to grow up without the night sky, at least as we know it, knew it, that generation is coming of age. But 10 to 15 years from now, kids growing up in Aurora, Wash Park, Timnath, Fort Collins, Loveland, could be looking up at the Milky Way from their own backyards, just as many of us did. And that generation will grow up to be far less cynical because of it. Dark sky restoration is an achievable and beautiful vision for the near future. Thanks.
Thank you, John. Great. So let let me ask you a couple of questions and then I'll open it to members of the audience for theirs. But you talked about public safety quite a bit. How much of this pollution is as a result of the public perception that more light provides increased public safety?
That's probably the number one, idea driving at least like on roads and stuff, and in a lot of places like alleys. I think that's a big part of what is leading people to make these kinds of decisions with the type of lighting they use at the individual level and the commercial level and the municipal level. Like the FBI has stated that the data doesn't support the idea that increased outdoor lighting deters crime. Studies, studies generally don't support the idea that increased outdoor lighting deters crime. There are some case studies that show exceptions, but there are also case studies that show where decreasing outdoor lighting has significantly decreased crime. Part of that is just context, like New York City and near some of their most dangerous developments, they mounted these obscene light poles and they decreased crime. Now, would any of the people who conducted the study want that kind of lighting in their neighborhood? I don't think they would. And also does something that happened in a enormous city in an exceptionally high crime area translate to other communities? For the most part, it doesn't. But also, there are studies, there is data at the urban, suburban, and rural level that show examples where light pollution doesn't correlate at all to crime, or lighting doesn't correlate at all to crime, or in some cases where decreasing lighting has decreased, especially property crime. Because if you think about an Amazon package left out on a front porch, a purse left in the passenger seat of a car, a toolbox left out on a deck, those are all low-hanging fruits, but not if people don't see them. So there are instances where increased lighting can increase the opportunity for crime and can increase property crime. It's also been shown, at least in some cases with graffiti, you don't want to tag a wall when you have to have one thing I want to touch on real quick. Jackson Lake State Park became dark sky certified in 2020, and they had this experience too where calls to law enforcement decreased significantly, property crime and theft decreased significantly. And part of the reason for this, from a law enforcement perspective, because I've talked to the people who were involved, I talked to the state park manager, one of the state park managers who is responsible for implementation. If you are in they equipped their common areas with motion sensor lighting, so the bathroom had motion sensors, the entryways had motion sensors, I think. So but otherwise the park was pretty dark at night, except for campfires and individual lanterns. But when you're in a comparatively dark area at night, light indicates there's human activity there. So law enforcement you know, if they see a light, they know that that indicates that there's human activity, and if it's somewhere where it shouldn't be, or probably shouldn't be, they can check it out. And so when you have a place that's just flooded with light, you have kind of, in a way, one way to think of it is that you have just like a ton of data, you know, and one person walking through a parking lot, you know, like jiggling car handles or something doesn't necessarily stand out. Whereas if you have in a predominantly dark area, if you're walking around and shining a flashlight into people's car windows, you're going to look real conspicuous.
That's good. Yeah, my feeling is that it's oftentimes people perceive that just more lights, you're going to be safer. Another issue that's of particular concern to me is Timnath has a large number of a variety of migratory birds, and I'm wondering what has a greater impact on that wildlife. Long-term sustained lighting, some form of light pollution versus intense short-term explosions like our upcoming 4th of July firework that's being held at a wildlife refuge in many respects. So any idea in terms of which is worse for those types of aviary species?
Probably the chronic. I mean, I doubt that summer celebrations and fireworks harm birds in terms of they probably don't love it, but all the time. But as far as our bird population goes, what's really important is that we make an effort to limit or eliminate light pollution and excessive outdoor lighting during the peak migrations in the spring and fall. So in the spring, bird migration peaks in early May. And so if you are in the habit of leaving your porch lights on May, and I think mid-October or late October, those are the two times that bird migration peaks. And so that's when it can really make a difference to, curb the amount of light that we use, because it allows birds to safely complete their migration.
Okay, all right. Any questions from the audience? For Jeff?
Question. So if you are a homeowner in Timnath, and you probably moved into a house you bought from a developer, you have no idea what the lighting design is, or I guess you know what it is because you look at it every day, but you have no idea if it's good or bad. What resources can we turn to say, okay, here are the fixtures that we have outside the house, and evaluate whether they're okay or whether they're really creating a big problem and need to be replaced or refitted?
Well, one really good resource that I included in this handout is Dark Sky International has a list of approved lighting products that I think they update annually. And if you're going to replace a light fixture, or if you're building a home or picking out light fixtures for your business, that's a really good resource. Because I think there are a lot of light fixtures that are marketed as shielded or dark sky friendly that really aren't. And kind of to your about self-assessment, basically when there's kind of like, at the local level, at the hyper-local level, the like abiding principle is basically, this is a gross oversimplification, but it's like, don't shine light into people's bedroom windows. I mean, that's like the ethos of dark sky. It's not like, as far as like at the neighborhood level, don't shine. And if you have a light that's shining, if it's not shining beyond your property line, it's probably not a problem, unless it's really intense, or unless, you know, it's really an inappropriate light spectrum. But, you know, proper shielding is really key. An unshielded light fixture that isn't too intense and that's like on the warmer end of the spectrum, you know, like a nice amber color light, that's not great, but it's not a huge problem. You know, it's ideal to, you know, like string lights, like Edison lights, you know, those can be really lovely, especially if you're hosting people. But like, what is good taste at 8 or 9 or 10 in the evening isn't at 2 in the morning, and just shutting those off at bedtime. The decorative lighting, that's really helpful.
So can you tell us, are there any communities in particular in Colorado that are doing a better job of, you know, controlling light pollution?
Aside from, I mean, in a way, Colorado's killing it. We have 18 certified dark sky places. That's more than almost any other state. We've got 12 state parks in the certification pipeline. We have at least 4 municipalities in the certification pipeline through the Dark Sky Mentor program that we run with funding from the Colorado Tourism Office. So, like, Paonia became certified last year. I'm told that, I haven't been to Ridgeway, but yeah. The head of our mentor program, Aaron Watson, really likes, he says that Ridgeway has really done a bang-up job, and they've got really good lighting ordinances and implementation and compliance. Westcliff has been dark sky certified for a long time. That's something that is, you know, recognized as having a big impact on the character of the town. And then I mentioned Jackson Lake State Park earlier. The town of Berthoud is in the certification pipeline. I think they're aiming to become certified by later this year or early next year. So a lot of communities are doing a really good job, and you know, even at the neighborhood level, you can make a big difference, if not in the quality of the night sky, then at least in your own quality of life. And if you, even like a lot of neighborhoods and like older neighborhoods, especially in northern Fort Collins, don't have street lights. And Timnath, the town of Timnath could probably save at least a couple $1 million over the next 10 years if we do our remaining development in a thoughtful way. You know, like the second half of Timnath Parkway that they haven't put light poles up in, and like that big stretch of Main Street and the other new subdivisions that are going in. If there were more people in the room, I would ask by show of hands, like, do you drive at night without headlights? Nobody drives at night without headlights. And so that brings up the question, like, how much street lighting do we actually need? Because I can drive around, I just got back from a trip to the Salt Lake City area, and they've really done a grotesque job of just like neurotically overlighting everything. Like, you could drive all up and down the valley at night, 2 o'clock in the morning without your headlights. and you'd be perfectly safe as a driver. It just doesn't make it like a great place to be a bird or a human who likes to sleep.
Yeah, I was in Tucson last December and was amazed by just how much you could see the sky with their control of lighting. I mean, it was complete surprise just how dark even the downtown was. And yet, you know, there wasn't at least I didn't fear for my safety being in a large metropolitan area. But it made a huge difference just in terms of how much of the sky you could see.
Yeah.
So any of the large cities in Colorado, like Colorado Springs or Denver, doing anything along those lines that you were aware of?
Definitely not. I mean, you know, like, I'm not necessarily the person to ask, but I don't really think so. You know, like every once in a while they pass new ordinances about like parking garage lighting or something specific, like that maybe mitigates light pollution, and they have some ordinances, but by and large, like there's no large municipality in Colorado that's shown the level of commitment of like Bozeman or Tucson or Flagstaff, you know, or the other towns and cities that have. But is it achievable at the level of a city? I think realistically, when you're talking about a city the size of Denver, you're going to have some sky glow, but you're not going to have like the kind of sky quality that you can achieve around here if you really want to, but you can still get most of the way there.
Okay, good. Any other questions?
Just one quick question. So, is the town of Timnath pursuing a dark sky strategy? And whether it is or not, what should Timnath be doing to become a dark sky community? And by extension, what should citizens of Timnath be advocating to their city council and planning commission in order to achieve that? What should we be doing to make this happen here?
We just updated our lighting ordinances, and there were people on the town staff that did a lot of research and put a lot of work into it, and it's a huge improvement that gets us maybe, you know, whether it gets us 60% of the way there or 95% of the way there kind of depends on their interpretation of some of the exemptions in the ordinance. And you know, a poorly designed, like, a sports stadium could, like, do a lot of damage, you know, or it could be like a perfectly functional, great sports stadium that has minimal impact on the natural environment. There's some stuff in there that's just kind of like, they have an exemption, I think, for public right-of-way lighting, which is street lighting. So I asked them to at least include more specific language around that, and I don't know if they did that before they passed the ordinance, but if they didn't, a lot of it is going to be a matter of discernment, you know, like decision-making by the planning commission and by zoning and by town staff. You know, like, we don't have the light fixtures around here, like the street lighting, it's not good design. It's shielded. It was probably marketed that way, but the bulb extends pretty far below the actual shield, which means that they do produce quite a bit of uplight. And they're also, I think, I have an app on my phone that measures this, and so I'm not 100% confident that it's super accurate, but those street lights are a little north of 4,000 Kelvin, maybe close to 5,000 Kelvin. They're brighter than they're cooler than they should be. They're not like, so I would just say like emailing the zoning department or planning commission or members of town council, or we live in a small town. You can go out and get a coffee with your town council member. That's one of the nice things about living here, and just paying attention to some of the development proposals.
So is this something that's easily corrected, or relatively inexpensive?
One thing about dark sky lighting practices is they save a whole lot of money if you plan ahead before you develop. It's a huge win. Like I said, it's a triple bottom line win. If you have to go back and do retrofits, it's gonna cost you a lot of money. There might be a quick payback period from energy savings, there might not. But one thing that you can do that's basically cost neutral is, and we did this, is there's basically an amortization clause for non-compliant lighting. So as those light fixtures burn out or amortize and have to be replaced, they will, at least according to code, and so at least in theory, they'll be replaced with compliant light fixtures, and that makes it really easy. But the question is, how do they interpret, who's actually making the decisions on town staff or, like on the ground, and are they aware of what's important to residents, because they're responsive to what matters to residents. So talking about, like having light fixtures with an appropriate, at an appropriate light spectrum in your neighborhood, and nudging them to, that's kind of the main thing, I guess, is just paying attention in general, and maybe taking advantage of the fact that we live in a small town and you can have a voice.
Good. Any other questions? If not, is there anything we could say about the dark sky event that is under consideration?
Oh, in August?
Yes.
We're looking at having a more fun, family-friendly, fun event come fall. So.
Okay.
The Starfest. Do you want to speak to that, John?
Yeah, there's next weekend I'm going to be at Lake City Starfest. I'll be speaking at that, but I think there's a lot of these around the state, so check out a Starfest. Last year it was just a wonderful experience. So Lake City's wonderful. The view of the night sky there is really, literally mind altering. So if not Lake City Starfest, I know it's a week away and that's a long shot, but it's worth keeping your eyes. Also, Rocky Mountain, or Northern Colorado Astronomical Society, NOCO ASTRO, Northern Colorado Astronomy Club, is very active. They have a lot of events in Lori State Park in Rocky Mountain and elsewhere. it's really worth checking out some of these events.
Good. Well, thank you. Certainly appreciate it if we can get you on another hand.
Thanks a lot.
You bet.
Thanks for hosting.